All right, so good morning. Now that we are recording, I will officially state that this is March 14th, 2023. And we're going to sit for 20 minutes and then we will, I will do some talking and we'll see what comes of that. Actually, some reading. Yeah. So we just passed the beginning of daylight savings. So I myself have been just catching up on the schedule of it all, which means I slept later than I would normally today. So hopefully meditation will be a process of waking up. Settling into a meditation posture that's supportive for your practice. Certainly one of the advantages of practicing online is that we can sit in whatever way we are comfortable. And we just want to balance that with staying alert, staying present. If we get too sort of sunken into the couch, we can get drowsy. So we want to try to stay upright. And that doesn't mean that we can't lie down to meditate. Just if you're lying down, best to do it with the eyes open. And so turning the attention inward and beginning by just feeling your body. What does it feel like as a living object, living being? The complex systems of consciousness and the nervous system, the flow of blood and oxygen. Create these subtle and sometimes not so subtle sensations that we can tune into and just sit with. And letting the body settle and soften. Releasing any tension you might feel, any holding. And feeling the breath moving in the body. The chest rising and falling. And as part of this kind of arriving or entering into a period of practice, see if you can just tune into your felt experience right now. The mood or emotion that's present. This too, like the nervous system and cardiovascular systems, is in flow, always moving, not static. We feel all of these aspects of our existence as energies, physical and mental, emotional. There's a tendency to put values on different aspects of experience, to judge them, name them in limiting ways. It can be beneficial to learn to step out of that particular framework. Just feel. This is a kind of letting go. Can actually be a little scary. Is that framework of understanding is reassuring on some level, helps us to believe that we're in control. Language and definitions, giving names to things. And this allows us to feel that we're not in just a random, chaotic universe. The true control, though, comes with letting go. The deeper control. This is tied in with equanimity. And we can develop that inner balance, a deep inner stillness. And there isn't the necessity for this superficial sense of control. This is a kind of trust in our own capacity to be present. And so we sit with the breath. So the rhythm and movement of breath is grounding for us, and also a kind of living metaphor. The whole experience of energy flowing through mind and body. We put breath at the center. Use that to help us to hold to the present moment. And then each time we get lost or swept away in thinking again, we return to the breath, to the body, to the felt experience. do that properly. There we go. The striker wound up on the floor. I couldn't find it. I had to hit the bell with my finger. All right, well, here we go. Good morning again. We're at the end of step 7 in A Burning Desire, which means there's very little left. So I'll have to figure out what to do next. Gotten through 3 years with 2 books. So that, I guess, means each book takes 2/3 of a year. No, wait, that's not right. No, a year and a third, year and a half. My math. The step 7, kind of used step 7 in this book as a way of really just talking about different ways to approach practice, and by that, no, the book is A Burning Desire, Dharmagata, The Path of Recovery. No, see, there was a question about what book we're in. Oh, what book next? Oh, sorry. I can't remember what I'm saying. Yeah, maybe. I was thinking I'm going through my collection of books, so to do the next one that I wrote, which is my workbook. But anyway, so I kind of take step 7 as being the step that's about practice in the limited sense, and really change in a broader sense. So step 7 in the 12 steps says we humbly asked him to remove our shortcomings, him being God. And I've talked about this as I inevitably do with this step, that this is really, it's vague, really. To me, it's pretty vague. Like, humbly asked him to remove our shortcomings. Okay, but what the hell? The question I always had was, how does that work? And so what I wrote in this book is like one version of an answer of how that works, because I take this line from Buddhadasa, great Thai forest master, who says, I quote, "From the Buddhist point of view, this is a matter of karma. We must act. That is, we must ask, seek, and knock for God to be moved. So if we ask God to remove our shortcomings, we must act. Mere faith is not enough. Even if one sits down to pray, it still will not be enough. In this context, the word ask implies an earnest effort to bring about a desired result. That is to say, we beseech the law of karma through our action and not merely with words." So that's the, basic Buddhist premise, that any change or anything that happens through causes, through karmic causes. And there are 3 forms of karma. That is something I talk about, seems like every time I teach. We create karma through thoughts, through speech, and through actions, which is why meditation is so important. It's, we think of karma as being external a lot, and material, but it all starts with the mind. So if our shortcomings are going to be removed through karma, it's going to start with our minds, because first we're going to have to see clearly what our shortcomings are. And also, so shortcomings, character defects, whatever, failings, habitual tendencies, whatever language you want to use. We need to see them clearly. We also need to see how they're created. So just in terms of our thinking, you have a thought, like in meditation, when we start to see clearly, or when we have moments of seeing clearly, let's say, in meditation, we can see, oh, that thought was triggered by that feeling, or that thought was triggered by this other thought, or what happened this morning before I meditated reminded me of something. And now I'm thinking about that. So it's easy, in my meditation this morning, I was thinking about like previous birthdays, right? I mean, it was like, oh yeah, just because, why? Well, obviously why, okay, it's your birthday, you're thinking about other birthdays. Like, what about that? And so we start to see the causal relationships, which is what allows us to step out of the habitual thinking, and particularly if we're talking about character defects, to see, oh, like if you have certain tendencies to, like, for instance, focus on the negative, or focus on anger, or focus on jealousy, that you see, oh, there I go, I'm doing that thing that I do. And that gives you the opportunity to intervene and stop doing what you're doing, right? And I mean, it's simple conceptually, very difficult to execute, right? Because those habitual patterns of thinking are so deeply ingrained that they are really aligned in our minds with who we are, right? And our belief systems about who we are. So that if we have negative thoughts about ourselves, or super positive narcissistic thoughts about ourselves, whatever they are, it's very hard for us to think of them as objectively, because they're just part of our belief system. Well, that's just who I am, right? So this practice can help us to step out of that framework and that belief system and see, oh, wow, I don't really have to believe that. I have I tell a story in one of my books about my belief about that somehow I didn't have manual dexterity. And, I have some perhaps created memory of my father saying that to me when I was like 5 years old, which is ridiculous. I can't believe my father would say that. He wasn't, he was not a cruel person. But anyway, somehow that got in my head, right? And I grew up with this idea that, oh, my brother Michael, who became a carpenter and was, really handy, that he had manual dexterity and I didn't. And one time I was like 18 or 19, and I'm sitting there doing this complicated finger picking. And somebody's like, what do you mean you don't have manual dexterity? You're playing the guitar. And I was like, oh, wow, maybe. So, how many of us have these ideas, right, in our minds about who we are? So this is this practice we're trying to do, which is kind of to deconstruct ourselves, what we call ourselves, and see what makes it up. And then try to make different choices so that we can develop new belief systems, or at least that we can function in more constructive ways. Because the problem with the belief systems is that they then trigger behavior, right? We act on these beliefs, and we act on these thoughts, and that then creates more karma, right? So when we can see, even if we're still like kind of caught in like, well, I'm kind of this way, but if we can see it and realize, oh, that thing that's telling me like it's pointless to even try. I don't know if you ever had that thought, but it's one of my favorites. Why bother? I'll never get it. It'll never, I'm a failure anyway, whatever your story is, right? that thing that tells me that, I can go, oh yeah, hi, as we say in AA, thanks for sharing. And now I'm going to make that call, or now I'm going to take that class, or now I'm going to, get that hammer and nail and start banging, even though I know I'm incompetent. So yeah, we can start to take the opposite action. I think that's a 12-step principle as well. So this is, this is what's beautiful to me about this practice. It's very practical. It's a practical practice. It's like, oh, all right, well, what can I do about this problem? It's not just sitting around analyzing it. It's not just meditating on it. It's then taking that into karma, into action. We beseech the law of karma through our actions, not merely with words. So, as I say, that's kind of the background of how I think about step 7. And then in this book, the decision I made was to kind of talk about the different kinds of Buddhist practices. So we're speaking mostly about, mental practices. So mindfulness and insight practice, compassion, love and compassion practice. Trying to find that other things, calm and concentration. And then finally, the last one I'm calling contemplation. So I'll read a bit of this. So actually, I'm on page 201, if you are reading along. When we learn meditation, we often get the idea that perfect meditation means not thinking at all. Perhaps there is a bias in this direction because Westerners place so much stock in thinking. Descartes' "I think, therefore I am" being the extreme version of this. Well, learning to drop thought, or to see through thought is an important part of the process of developing meditative tools. Learning how to think carefully and wisely is also important. The word contemplate has to do with connecting heaven and earth. I'm not sure where I got this. I think Ajahn Amaro talked about this. The design of temples was originally meant to correspond to the design of the home of the gods. In one definition, these structures linked the geometries of heaven and earth. So when we contemplate, we are trying to connect our thinking with this geometry, mimicking the thoughts of the gods. Clearly, the Buddha did a lot of thinking, very good thinking. His formulation of the Four Noble Truths and everything that springs from that teaching required deep and careful thought. The Buddha doesn't say that after his enlightenment, he stopped thinking, but rather that he is a, quote, master of thought, of the courses of thought, master of the courses of thought. That shows up in the Majjhima Nikaya, Sutta number 20. He's not swept along by impulse and craving. Rather, he stays on top of his thinking mind and directs it at will. We can infer from his teachings that the contemplation that guided him was, what is the cause of suffering and how can I end it? There's nothing esoteric or metaphysical about this question. It's quite straightforward and practical. So while we should strive to overcome compulsive thought, we can benefit a great deal from directed, intentional, and conscious thought. One of the ways contemplation is formally done is by taking some traditional spiritual question like, who am I? And asking it over and over, letting the answers penetrate deeper and deeper. This combines concentration with thought in an intentional way that can evoke a breakthrough in consciousness, a powerful new insight. The trick is to keep the mind on the question. And because we are so habituated to letting the mind wander, that's very difficult for a beginning meditator. That's probably why contemplation isn't emphasized when people teach beginning meditation. A less formal kind of contemplation happens pretty naturally in practice. When our mind is settled a bit, sometimes some issue will come up, something that's been in the back of our minds that we haven't been addressing. If we look at such an issue carefully, without letting the mind just fall into digression, the free associative drifting that characterizes much unconscious thought, or rumination, the self-destructive focus on our flaws, it can be very productive. But this practice has to be used sparingly and discreetly, or we'll never develop the mindfulness and concentration that allow for penetrating insight. Our own study can also be a kind of contemplation. Some 12-step meetings are focused on the literature of the program, and this makes for a good way to reflect on those teachings. When we gather with others to discuss a text, our minds are focused on the topic, and hearing the opinions of others often helps to open up our own understanding. When I go on self-retreat, I often take some of the traditional suttas along for study. These are not particularly entertaining, so I don't have to worry about becoming distracted as I might by a novel. I've found that my understanding of the suttas is much deeper when I am on retreat. Some centers and teachers are now offering trainings and retreats that bring in more of a contemplative study element. This book was written, it was published in 2010, so that's grown quite a bit. This is part of the maturing of the Dharma in the West, as we move beyond the limited idea of Buddhism as nothing more than silent meditation. Focused, directed thought has other uses beyond study. Cognitive therapy, which is increasingly being merged with Buddhist mindfulness teachings, is another way to use thought intentionally, in this case as a healing. This work involves challenging subconscious reactive thoughts with rational responses. In a way, this is another kind of contemplation, aligning our thinking with the heaven of our wise selves and disidentifying with the hell of obsessive, fearful thought patterns. Excuse me. In all of this, we can see that contemplation is intertwined with mindfulness, especially mindfulness of thought, as well as with concentration, which is what allows us to think clearly and deeply. We see that these practices are not separate, but rather work together to support our growth. If we become too attached to one form, we lose the natural flow of practice. Wise practice involves asking ourselves and our teachers what would be a skillful way of working with this moment. This moment is unique. Each must be addressed on its own terms. If we try to apply yesterday's solutions to today's problems, we'll always be a step behind. The challenge of mindfulness practice is to face each moment with attention and investigation to try to find the best way of expressing love, compassion, and wisdom in each moment. Insight takes different forms. The first insights people have are often personal and psychological. These come from seeing the habitual ways our minds work and what our thoughts create. But these are considered to be less important than the universal insights into suffering, impermanence, and corelessness that tend to be nonverbal and impersonal. These often don't require thought or contemplation, just very close and steady attention. If we focus only on the first kind of insight, then our practice can become like an extended form of psychotherapy, just problem solving and processing emotions, thoughts, and memories. While this can serve a certain purpose in terms of spiritual development, it is limited. We need to have a balanced personal sense of self, some self-confidence and inner harmony in order to grow on a spiritual path. But if we don't go beyond this to the transcendent aspect of practice, then we are abandoning the ultimate purpose of meditation, not just personal healing, but spiritual transformation. Ta-da, the end of step 7. So, yeah, I mean, this is like a sort of a persistent question, the uses of thought in meditation. And, you know, it's like the dirty secret of meditation that we spend most of our time thinking while we're meditating, right? And, when you have the idea that that's not supposed to happen, then, you're in mode of like success and failure in your meditation, like judging your practice all the time. But then if you just say, oh, well, it doesn't matter, then you kind of lose the thread, and just it winds up being, meditation just becomes a daily chance to space out. So it really takes I'd say a kind of a maturing of our practice to get to a place where we can see how to hold thought, and how to work with what's going on in the mind. And as I so often say, this is probably every teacher has their own themes they return to, but the one I return to is coming back to the felt experience, that trying to directly confront thoughts or stop thoughts, somehow thinking that I'll just come back to the breath, and I'll just the breath. It's a great concentration tool, but what became apparent to me when I sort of finally came to grips with this challenge was that much of the time when my mind was persistently wandering, it's because there was a feeling, an unresolved emotion or feeling beneath the surface that wasn't being fully acknowledged or integrated. And that if instead of trying to get into this breath thought cycle, if I turned instead to the feeling, I found that often had and has the power to interrupt the thought creation process. Because it turned out that the thoughts were not really the thing that was, they don't have their own self-sustaining energy. It's the feelings underneath the thoughts that feeds them. And that when I open to the feelings and let them flow through as energies, that the thoughts are deprived of their agitating energy, because I'm no longer agitated. And that's because what's going on much of the time when there is this stream of thoughts is that there's a resistance to the underlying feelings, an unknown, unseen resistance, which is stirring up this energy. And when that resistance is removed and the feelings just flow through, then they don't continue to create this the mental agitation so I mean, this is just, and so this is like the mindfulness insight process of seeing cause and effect. And this is, and I don't even really, this is how I practice and how I experience it. I'm not sure. I don't know if that's how it's going to work for you. I think it's I think it's a very helpful approach, and one that is really worth at least trying. But the idea, what I want to point out is that this understanding of this process came through my own mindful attention to my experience, along with instruction and teachings from teachers and from Buddha Dharma. And that's what I encourage you to do. I mean, it's fine, try Kevin's approach. That's cool. But more importantly, watch the cause and effect relationship between things that you do in meditation and the results. So this is because that's like a key underlying element of mindfulness is to see cause and effect. When you look at the Four Noble Truths, the truth of suffering, the cause of suffering, the truth of the end of suffering, the truth of the cause of the end of suffering, you see that the Four Noble Truths are about karma, about cause and effect. And it's what the Buddha was constantly pointing to. It's why he stepped out of the kind of mythical, magical, religious kind of framework that he had been raised in, the Brahmanic system that was like, make this sacrifice, kill this goat, and then the gods will do what you want them to do, or, keep this fire burning because the fire gods will then take care of you. It's like, no, that's magic, man. Come on. How do things really happen, right? What is cause and effect? And that's our challenge, right? How did we get here? I mean, it's one of the reasons we go to therapy. Like, why am I so messed up, right? I've got to talk to a therapist and sort it out. And then we get into, that often gets into this lengthy causal relationship between how we were raised and our childhood and all that. But Buddhism is much more engaged in, and mindfulness is much more engaged in, not that extended process of karma, but the moment by moment karma. Like right now, like here I am meditating, like, oh, that thought, where'd that come from? What are the connections I can make right now and see this? Because this is the only moment when I can change karma. All that past, all that trauma, whatever, childhood stuff, it's all gone. I can't do anything about it. It might help me to understand it and see how it affects me now, but it's only now that I can actually transform this flow. And that's the great challenge of our work, is what can I do right now? And so again, be here now. There we go. Oh yeah, right. That's what they told us to do. Be mindful, stay in the present moment. But it's not just be in the present moment, but be in the present moment very attentively. What is going on in this moment? What connections are being made? What's arising? What is ceasing? How is that happening? And I don't want to, turn this into like, oh God, I've got to like, sit there and like, watch out. Like, what's that? But, figure it all out. It's much more of an organic process than that. It's something that we try to make. When we say it's our practice, we don't mean it's just the thing that we do for 20 minutes or 30 minutes a day when we meditate. We mean this is our way of living, and that we kind of try to bring in, great. Mindfulness is great. Like, okay, I'm going to be mindful of walking, or I'm going to be mindful of eating or something. Right. But mindfulness of the mind is the key element of mindfulness. And if you keep that as a kind of companion throughout your days, then you start to make connections just intuitively. Oh, wait, what was I just doing? How did that, what did I, and you just, things start to fall into place. And then as you're meditating with a little bit more focus, it's like, oh yeah, right. Things get even sharper and clearer. And we have that opportunity to really bring about change in our lives and in our minds and our hearts and minds. So I hope that's helpful. I offer these words as support for your own practice and your own lives. And And I'll open it up with a few minutes left. John, hi. You're still muted.
How about now?
Yep, I can hear you now.
Okay, great. So as you were describing that experience where you were meditating and you had a thought, and then you started looking at what the feeling was, have you got one? And I realized after that you said, don't, this works for me. Don't necessarily try Kevin's way, but do you have one of those experiences that you could describe, like where you had a thought and then you were like, oh my God, here's the feeling that was underneath that you could share with us if you care to?
Yeah, it's not so much the content of the thought, it's the energy of the thought. It's the way that thoughts just are going. Like I have had the experience that like I can't stop my thoughts, and it's like really frustrating, right? Like particularly like I'm on a retreat and I've been like, sitting for a few days, but my mind is still going. And I just shifted where my attention was focused. Like my attention was focused on my breath and my thoughts. And then I realized, oh, I'm looking in the wrong place. And then I turned to the feeling. It was like, oh, and the thinking just kind of quieted. So it wasn't like a particular feeling that triggered a particular thought. It's just the energy of feeling much more than the energy of thoughts, rather than a like, oh, I'm feeling anxious. Oh, or like I'm having fearful thoughts. Oh, I'm feeling anxiety. It's not. You can make those connections. I mean, you can see it. I mean, I catch it sometimes outside of meditation because because of my depressive tendencies, I'll notice some really negative thought if I'm like really on the edge of a bad mood, and kind of go, oh, what is going on? And then I just automatically drop into, oh, I see. I've got this unpleasant feeling. And I just need to allow the feeling to be there. And it's scary. That's the thing. This is why, I didn't talk about that. I mean, this often comes up. It's scary to feel your feelings. That's why we think about them instead. It feels much safer. We have this illusion that by thinking about our feelings, we can control them. Or by thinking about anything, we can control it, right? This is like one of the human delusions. And so, then it's like, oh, I'm having this feeling. Well, I'll process it, think it, make it go away. What can I do? Who should I call? What should I, what drug should I take? Whatever. And it's like, just turn toward it and feel, ooh, that's like, is it okay to just feel this? It's not going to kill me. Oh, okay. It's okay. It's just unpleasant. That's the really challenging part of the process, that the feelings we're talking about are not pleasant feelings. They're ones we don't want to feel, and they're inherently frightening and unpleasant. But you realize after you start to work with that the alternative is to sink into a worse space, a worse mental space, by getting into this struggle. And, and you get into, it's like, no, I just have to, this is just what's happening right now. It's just a blah. Okay. Blah, breathe, blah, I'm speaking out of present moment experience. So there you go. Steve.
Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks, John.
Oh my goodness. I don't have a question. I just have a comment on this teaching this morning. How profound it hit me was, I look back over my 40 years of trying to meditate and understand. I mean, only the past few years where I've really taken on studying meditation and practicing listening to teachers and whatnot. But I've come to this place in my meditations over the last 6 months or so where constantly going back to the breath just didn't seem right. There's something that was making me, and all these things you were talking about this morning. So I try to do a little bit of contemplation before I start meditation to set myself up for my meditation, to think about, well, what do I want to, because I want to feel my feelings. And I'm exploring that. And I start to explore my feelings when I want to go diving into the food to relieve myself of any anxiety that I might have. So I just want to say that this was just a fabulous teaching. And I hope that we can explore this deeper on the retreat, because that would be a fabulous time to do that. And I just appreciate what you had to say about feeling those feelings. It is a scary thing to do. And when I just, it's a strange thing. I can't explain it. When I keep wanting to go back to the breath, I go, I don't have to keep doing this. There's got to be some other way to feel my feelings. So
Yeah,
that's just want to make that comment.
that's great. Thanks, Steve. Yeah. Yeah. Some of you will be coming away with us on Thursday for a little weekend retreat. Looking forward to it. Cheryl, hello.
Hello, thank you as well. I similar thoughts, and that resonated with what Steve just said. The question I had is, I get the sense that that feeling your feelings is more of a bodily connection, where connecting with the thoughts, I'm in my head more. And I just wondered if you could speak to that.
That's really a great point. Thank you for bringing that up. And it's, I don't know where I was reading or something that came up in the last few days about how sort of disembodied people are in our society. And, here we are looking at a screen in order to be together. And so hard to stay in our bodies. And absolutely, this is a body practice. It's a subtle form of physical experience. So it's not as obvious as ordinary sensations. And so it takes a cultivating our attention in a refined way to tune in to these feelings. And I would say that a lot of people never actually feel the feelings that we're talking about here. People who are driven by greed, hatred, and delusion, who are really driven by it, don't feel these feelings. And it's probably wise that they don't feel them, because if they did, they'd probably be overwhelmed by their greed, hatred, and delusion. I mean, if Vladimir Putin never tuned into his hatred, he'd probably go crazy. Just as an aside, just as an example. But yes, this is so. It's hard to talk about these feelings, and feelings itself as a word is somewhat vague. And I often use the word energy, and I'm talking about the same thing, because these feelings are felt more to me on what I call an energetic level, so that when you tune into them, it's not like feeling a toothache or, hot, cold. It's more like a flow, and yeah, it is centered. We can certainly start with the heart center and the solar plexus, but then as we start to watch, we can see open beyond that as well. But yeah, I mean, the answer to the question is yes.
Okay, yeah, thank you. I do. That it's something I have felt over the years. Is I I am more aware how disembodied I have been and, can be at times. And
Yeah.
it was also helpful even at the very beginning of our meditation, how you even tapped into just even connecting with our body as systems like the cardiovascular,
Yeah.
the nervous system. So
Yeah.
anyway, appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah. And something I was going to say that well, this is what it is, that when we talk about these feelings, they are also intertwined with emotion. So they're not just physical. So they're really, I mean, what I'm talking about is really something that's intertwined, interrelated, a couple of different things that are interacting, so that the physical aspect of it brings along with it an emotional or a mood aspect that might not be one like a primary emotion. It's not necessarily like anger, sadness, fear, but it's still, I think our minds still identify it as having an emotional quality to it. Like it has more information than just, hot, cold, the kind of typical sensations. It carries along this information or suggestion of information, an implication of like, this, like we interpret it as having meaning. I feel this way, right? That then we're naming it and then giving it meaning. And this is like one of the kind of important aspects of this, is seeing how we give meaning to feelings that might not have that meaning, or it's very, very tricky, this realm. It's a very subtle realm that I think is deeply influential in our mind states, in our lives, in our and behind our addiction, very much behind our addiction, because there's this underlying discomfort with existence, with being who we are, and the feeling that it's not right and needs to be fixed in some way. There's something wrong, and so we're that's that, what's that line in the big book about restless and discontent? Vicky, what's that line? Restless, irritable, and discontent. Is that it?
Restless, yeah, right. Yep.
Restless, irritable, and discontent. So that's kind of the characterization of this state. That's or not state, but these energies that we kind of live with. So let me take Sam, get your sister now, Cheryl, and got the whole team here.
Thanks, Kevin.
Hey,
And
Sam.
our mom happens to be on this call as well.
Oh, really? Well, awesome. Who's your mom?
Joyce Herman.
Joyce? Wow. I'm going to have to start charging double for you guys, Oh, no, actually half price, the family rate, right? Sorry.
I just wanted to add in the piece that I'm sure you have taught many times around I'm wondering about the meta of it all, like opening to the love that is holding us, and so that we can have that as a refuge as we turn towards those scary feelings, and just our own compassion for ourselves and the human condition. And just, for me, it's a sense of divine presence that I can lean into. And so makes it a little less scary and all about me. So that's
fantastic, Sam. Thank you. Yeah. I mean, without that sense of care in that space, that's probably what, without that, it probably does become much more scary. Whereas, as you say, there is this holding the feelings with kindness, holding ourselves with kindness, and the recognition that what we're touching into is dukkha. This is suffering, and the wise response to dukkha is love and compassion, rather than what's wrong, judgment, resistance, what's wrong with me, or I shouldn't feel this, or let me go have a drink. It's that care. Yeah. Jack Kornfield, instead of talking about mindfulness, now he talks about loving awareness. So awareness in his teaching is always tied up with love. So thank you. That's a great note to end on. So I wish you all a lovingly aware day and week. I'll see some of you on the Thursday for a retreat. And Debbie, you're going to be teaching Friday night, I believe. Thank you very much. So there will be a regular Zoom class on Friday. And happy Pi Day. Don't eat too much pie. And 3.14. And happy Albert Einstein birthday and Steph Curry birthday. So there you go. All the finer people were born on
Happy
March
Kevin
14th.
birthday, and we're going to get a break in the rain on travel day. So that's
Oh, good. Yeah. And then it'll be raining from the whole retreat. All right, you guys. Thanks a lot.
Happy birthday.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thanks, guys.
Kevin.
Thank
All right,
you.
take care.
Teaching today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Happy birthday.
Thank you. Thanks, Ann.
Bye, Kevin. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.